It is 22nd March 1916, and the small tramp steamer Farnborough wallows in the gray Atlantic swell, 140 miles southwest of Ireland. Her hull is streaked with rust, her paintwork peeling. Smoke dribbles from her single funnel in fitful spurts that suggest poorly maintained boilers. On deck, a crew of 12 scrambles about their duties with the unhurried movements of merchant sailors who have seen too many uneventful voyages. A tattered red ensign hangs limp at her stern. She is exactly what she appears to be, an unremarkable cargo vessel of perhaps 3,000 tons struggling through another tedious crossing with a hold full of timber. But the periscope cutting through the water 800 yards to starboard has made a fatal miscalculation. The German submarine commander sees easy prey. He surfaces, confident that his deck gun will make short work of this defenseless merchantman. The U-boat's crew emerges onto the conning tower, and the gun crew takes position. A warning shot cracks across the Farnborough's bow. The response is immediate and perfectly choreographed. The merchant crew erupts into apparent panic. Men race for the lifeboats. The ship seems to lose way, wallowing beam on to the submarine. The panic party tumbles into boats and rows frantically away, leaving their vessel to her fate. The U-boat closes to 600 yards, 400. The German commander moves within easy range, preparing to finish the helpless freighter with gunfire rather than waste a precious torpedo. It is precisely the mistake Commander Gordon Campbell has been waiting months to provoke. At his signal, entire sections of Farnborough's hull collapse outward on hinges. The rust-streaked panels that had concealed 4 12-pounder guns crash down. The white ensign of the Royal Navy snaps up the mast. In fewer than 15 seconds, Farnborough transforms from victim to predator. The first salvo catches the U-boat's conning tower. The second smashes into her pressure hull. Within 4 minutes, submarine U-68 slips beneath the waves, taking all hands with her. This is the essence of the Q ship. Deception weaponized to its most lethal extreme. In the most crucial maritime campaign of the First World War, Britain turned its own apparent weakness into an ingenious trap. The problem. By late 1914, the German U-boat campaign had evolved from a novelty into an existential crisis. Britain imported roughly 40% of its food and the vast majority of raw materials essential to the war effort. Every week, German submarines sent another 20,000 tons of British and Allied shipping to the bottom. The mathematics were brutally simple. If the destruction continued unchecked, Britain would starve or capitulate long before the armies in France achieved anything decisive. Traditional naval responses had proven woefully inadequate. Destroyers and patrol vessels could hunt submarines, but the vastness of the Atlantic made systematic patrols impossibly inefficient. A U-boat captain with even moderate caution could spot a warship's silhouette or smoke from miles away and simply submerge, waiting for the threat to pass. Submarines of the period could remain underwater for only 2 or 3 hours before requiring fresh air, but this was more than sufficient to evade a searching destroyer. The hunters were too obvious, too identifiable. Convoys offered some protection, but were not yet systematically organized in 1915 and early 1916. Merchant captains resisted sailing in groups, arguing it slowed passages and concentrated targets. The Admiralty itself was initially skeptical, concerned that assembling large groups of ships would create unmissable targets rather than protection. Meanwhile, the slaughter continued. In 1915 alone, German submarines sank 396 British merchant vessels, totaling 855,721 tons. The numbers climbed month by month. U-boat commanders operated with near impunity, often surfacing to sink unarmed merchantmen with deck guns to conserve torpedoes, which were expensive and available in limited quantities. The psychological dimension was equally corrosive. Merchant sailors knew they sailed vessels with no defense beyond speed, which most cargo ships lacked, or evasion, which was impossible against a submerged stalker. Morale plummeted. Insurance rates became prohibitive. Neutral shipping avoided British ports. The blockade that Britain had imposed on Germany was in danger of being reversed, strangling the island nation itself. What was needed was not simply a faster warship or a better weapon, but a fundamental reimagining of the hunter-prey relationship. The U-boat's greatest advantage was their ability to choose when and where to attack. The solution required turning that advantage into a fatal vulnerability. The solution. The Q-ship concept emerged from the fertile mind of Rear Admiral Henry Oliver and the encouragement of First Lord Winston Churchill in late 1914, though similar ideas had been proposed by junior officers. The Admiralty established the Q-ship program under the designation Special Service Vessels, operating from a deliberately obscure office that coordinated with shipyards across Britain. The concept was elegant. Convert ordinary merchant vessels into heavily armed warships whilst maintaining every appearance of defenselessness. The engineering challenge was considerable. A typical Q-ship conversion began with a small freighter or coastal trader of 1,000 to 5,000 tons. Naval constructors from facilities including Chatham, Portsmouth, and private yards such as Camel Laird in Birkenhead worked to specifications that bordered on theatrical set design. The vessels retained their civilian appearance down to details that would satisfy close inspection. Rusting plates were carefully maintained, paintwork was deliberately weathered, deck cargo was arranged to appear authentic whilst concealing gun positions. The weaponry was substantial. A typical Q-ship carried 4 to 6 guns, ranging from 12-pounders to 4.7-inch naval rifles, armament that could sink a surface submarine within minutes. Each gun was concealed behind collapsible panels ingeniously designed to drop away in under 10 seconds. These panels were constructed of painted canvas stretched over wooden frames, indistinguishable from solid hull plating at any distance beyond a few dozen yards. The guns themselves were mounted on standard naval carriages but positioned behind false deckhouses, cargo holds, or bulwarks that collapsed on hinges or dropped away entirely. Below decks, the transformations were equally thorough. Magazines for shells and cordite charges were installed with blast-proof doors. Additional buoyancy compartments were added to keep the vessel afloat, even after sustaining torpedo damage. Q-ships were expected to absorb hits and continue fighting. Engine rooms received reinforcement and, in some cases, upgraded power plants to provide the speed necessary to close with or escape from an enemy. Freshwater capacity was increased to allow extended patrols of 3 to 4 weeks. The crews posed their own challenge. Each Q-ship required a company of 60 to 80 men, combining genuine merchant sailors with trained naval gunners. The merchantmen had to be convincing in their apparent panic and abandonment of ship. The naval personnel had to remain hidden, often for hours in cramped spaces behind false bulkheads, waiting for the order to reveal the ship's true nature. Training exercises practiced the choreography of the panic party, abandoning ship whilst gun crews remained absolutely concealed. Then the explosive revelation when targets came within killing range. Production figures remain imprecise. Operational security demanded it, but estimates suggest Britain commissioned between 180 and 200 Q-ships during the war, with perhaps 60 to 70 operating simultaneously at the campaign's peak in 1917. Vessels ranged from small coastal steamers of barely 1,000 tons to purpose-built ships of 4,000 tons designed from the keel up as Q-ships. Some were fitted with torpedo tubes, a few carried seaplanes. The variety was intentional. U-boat commanders needed to suspect every vessel, never knowing which harmless freighter might suddenly bristle with guns. Operational use. The Q ships achieved their first confirmed kill in July 1915 when HMS Prince Charles sank U-36 off the coast of Scotland. The template established in that engagement, apparent panic, abandoned ship, patient waiting whilst the submarine closed, then devastating close-range fire, became the standard tactical approach. Commander Gordon Campbell, who commanded Farnborough and later Pargust, became the most successful Q-ship captain, personally accounting for 3 confirmed U-boat kills and earning the Victoria Cross for his coolness under fire. The engagement reports, those that survive in Admiralty archives, reveal the psychological strain of Q-ship operations. Crews spent weeks at sea maintaining their merchant disguise, knowing that success required allowing an enemy submarine to close within torpedo range before responding. The panic party had to perform their roles convincingly whilst their shipmates remained hidden, sometimes in spaces so confined that men fainted from heat and lack of air. If the U-boat commander suspected deception, a single torpedo could sink the Q-ship with all hands before her guns could engage. Records document successful engagements in the western approaches, the Irish Sea, and the Mediterranean. HMS Dunraven fought a running gun battle with UC-71 in August 1917, sustaining severe damage but ultimately forcing the submarine to surface, where she was destroyed by a British patrol vessel drawn by the sound of gunfire. HMS Stockforce sank UB-6 off the coast of France. HMS Tamarisk accounted for U-83 in the Mediterranean. Each success represented countless hours of patient cruising, elaborate deception, and the constant risk that the next periscope sighting would end in the Q-ship's destruction rather than the submarines. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The psychological impact on U-boat operations was perhaps more significant than the raw numbers suggest. German submarine commanders became increasingly cautious, reluctant to surface within gun range of any vessel. This forced them to rely more heavily on submerged torpedo attacks, which were considerably less accurate and consumed their limited torpedo stocks more rapidly. The mere possibility that any innocent-looking freighter might be a Q-ship complicated every tactical decision. Comparative analysis. Germany experimented with similar deception tactics but never deployed them systematically. The few German commerce raiders disguised as merchant vessels operated primarily in distant waters against Allied shipping, not as anti-submarine weapons. The fundamental asymmetry of the naval war made Q-ships far more valuable to Britain. Germany was attempting to starve Britain through submarine warfare, whilst Britain's surface fleet already controlled most of the world's sea lanes. The United States, after entering the war in 1917, adopted the Q-ship concept with characteristic enthusiasm but limited success. American Q-ships, designated mystery ships, operated primarily along the East Coast and in European waters. USS Santee engaged U-boats on several occasions but achieved no confirmed kills. The American vessels tended to be larger and more heavily armed than their British counterparts. The USS Ladonia displaced 4,000 tons and carried 5 4-inch guns. But they also proved less convincing in their merchant disguises and arrived too late in the war to perfect the tactics. The critical difference was experience. British Q-ship crews developed extraordinary skill in the elaborate theater required for success. The timing of the reveal, the positioning of the ship, the discipline required to hold fire whilst an enemy approached. These demanded months of training and operational experience. American crews, however eager, simply had insufficient time to develop comparable expertise before the armistice. In terms of raw effectiveness, the numbers are sobering. British Q-ships engaged German submarines on approximately 180 occasions and achieved roughly 12 to 15 confirmed kills, with several more probable victories where U-boats were damaged but escaped. The ratio suggests that Q-ship operations were extremely dangerous, with success rates below 10% for individual engagements. Yet this understates their impact. The mere existence of Q-ships forced changes in German submarine tactics that reduced the overall effectiveness of the U-boat campaign far beyond the handful of submarines actually destroyed. Impact and legacy. Assessing the Q-ship's true contribution to the war effort requires acknowledging significant uncertainty. Admiralty records from the period remain partially classified, and German U-boat logs were often lost when submarines were sunk. The 12 to 15 confirmed kills represent a fraction of the 178 German U-boats lost during the war, but pure mathematics misses the strategic significance. The psychological impact on German submarine operations was demonstrably real. After 1916, U-boat commanders increasingly attacked from submerged positions rather than surfacing to use deck guns. This tactical shift reduced their efficiency. Submerged attacks were slower, offered poorer visibility, and required expensive torpedoes rather than shells. Forcing this change multiplied the protective effect of the Q-ship program far beyond the vessels they actually sank. The material cost was considerable. Britain lost approximately 60 Q-ships during the war, most to torpedo attacks before they could reveal themselves and engage. The casualty rates amongst Q-ship crews were substantially higher than those of conventional merchant sailors or even destroyer crews, as Q-ship tactics deliberately invited attack. The courage required to sail week after week as apparently defenseless bait cannot be overstated. 3 Victoria Crosses were awarded to Q-ship commanders, recognizing both their tactical achievements and the extraordinary demands of their role. The Q-ship concept influenced anti-submarine warfare throughout the 20th century, though never again with quite the same theatrical deception. During the Second World War, Britain experimented with fighter catapult ships and merchant aircraft carriers, merchant vessels fitted with aircraft launch equipment, which represented a conceptual descendant of the Q-ship idea, combat capability hidden within an apparently civilian vessel. The modern equivalent might be found in unmarked surveillance vessels or commercial ships equipped with intelligence-gathering equipment, though none match the direct combat role of the First World War Q-ships. Several Q-ships survived the war and returned to civilian service, their elaborate modifications removed and their wartime adventures classified. HMS Result, one of the more successful Q-ships, was photographed in detail after the war, and these images now reside in the Imperial War Museum archives, providing a rare documented example of the collapsible gun panels and concealed armament positions. No complete Q-ship survives intact today, though fragments and photographs preserve the technical ingenuity of their construction. Closing. It is 22nd March 1916, and the small tramp steamer Farnborough wallows in the gray Atlantic swell. In 4 minutes of carefully rehearsed violence, she has transformed the equation of submarine warfare. The U-boat that approached expecting easy prey now rests in 200 fathoms, her crew entombed in her pressure hull. The merchant sailors in the lifeboats row back to their vessel, climbing aboard to resume their patrol. The rust-streaked panels are winched back into position. The 12-pounder guns disappear behind painted canvas. The tattered red ensign returns to the stern. Within an hour, Farnborough is once again precisely what she appears to be, an unremarkable cargo vessel struggling through another tedious crossing. But every U-boat commander who hears of U-68's fate will remember the lesson. The harmless merchantman might be a predator. The defenseless freighter might carry enough firepower to send a submarine to the bottom before her commander realizes his error. The very weakness that invited attack might be the most dangerous deception of all. In the brutal calculus of maritime warfare, the Q-ships achieved something that pure firepower could not. They made every decision fraught with uncertainty, every target potentially lethal. They did not win the war against the U-boats. That achievement belongs to the convoy system, patrol aircraft, depth charges, and the sheer industrial capacity that replaced losses faster than submarines could inflict them. But the Q-ships bought time when time was desperately needed, and they extracted a psychological price that no ledger of tonnages sunk can adequately measure. 180 vessels sailing under false colors, 60 crews lost, 15 U-boats confirmed destroyed, thousands of merchant sailors who continued crossing the Atlantic knowing that somewhere in the vast gray emptiness, a disguised warship sailed amongst them, turning the predators into prey. The hunters had become the hunted, and they never entirely recovered their confidence.